All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Just before we dive in too much, some of the standard Zoom protocols. We have live transcripts going, so you can toggle those on and off at the bottom of your screen. This meeting also is being recorded so that we can post to our website later for anyone who may have missed it, so just be aware of that. And yeah, we want to keep this pretty conversational, so if you have questions, feel free to use the chat. Otherwise, you can also just unmute yourself and speak. I'm not offended if you cut me off, so you may have to do so if you want to get a word in when I'm in presentation mode. But anyway, so glad to have you. And before we dive into the slides, I'll take a minute to introduce myself and our staff. So my name is Evan Schweitz. I'm a transit planner here at Metro and helping to organize the MetroNEXT effort.
I'm Annie Pagaga. I'm the communications specialist at MicroTransit, and I'm going to be the one kind of monitoring the chat. But like Evan said, feel free to, unmic or comment in the chat as you see fit.
Ivan, do you want to introduce yourself and then I'll go last?
Yes, this is Ivan Maldonado. Este es Iván Maldonado. Soy el diputado ejecutivo de Metro. Estoy aquí para contestar alguna pregunta que usted tenga. Si puede poner información mediante este programa, entonces nosotros le contestaremos. Por favor, pregunte lo que desee y le contestaremos sus preguntas al final o mientras las personas están hablando. Aquí estamos a su orden.
Great, thank you. And I'm Lauren Sensick. I'm the CEO of MicroTransit. I just want to take a second and say how much I appreciate everyone taking the time out of your busy schedules to have this conversation with us. To us, MetroNEXT is a really exciting and fun planning effort where we're looking into the future about what improvements we can make in the near term for transit, but also thinking a little outside the box and really visioning what we want transit to look like 5 to 10 years into the future. We have some ideas that we want to share with you, but really the point of tonight is for you to tell us your ideas, your thoughts, your reactions. So please do speak up and let us know what you think and what you think of our ideas and any improvements you might have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Evan and feel free to jump in at any point. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lauren. So yeah, over the past year or so, we've been undergoing this MetroNEXT process. And right now we're kind of right in the middle where we're looking at framing the transit network and supporting those additional connections. So the information that we'll share tonight is kind of a recap of the sessions that we've held over the last few weeks back into November. And then once we take all this input, we'll put together some scenarios that kind of look at our overall strategies that we'll consider for the MetroNEXT plan. And so we'll be presenting that publicly sometime in the new year. So stay tuned for that and know that it's not too late. We definitely want your feedback now so that it can shape our planning effort. So all along, we've been reviewing lots of different ways that Metro can improve over about the next 5 to 10 years is what we're aiming. So we've talked about more frequent bus arrivals, better bus stops and amenities, potential future orbit lines, and new types of service to expand across the region. So those are all things that we're trying to consider and accommodate, looking at our current budget, but also towards future possibilities to help plan for the transit agency that we want to see in our region in the future. So one of the things that we wanted to hear from folks tonight is a discussion of how people pay their fare. So again, feel free to enter in the chat, or if you'd like to ask a question or speak on this subject, you're welcome to. But we've got a new payment system called UMO. It's actually a phone app that you can use, and it scans a reader on the front door of each bus, or if you're riding Orbit, the reader's at every door of the bus. And it's designed to allow you to really pay faster and easier than previous methods. We also offer with the UMO system a smart card. I actually have one at my desk right here that has the same functionality and setup for the user. But if you prefer a card that's in your wallet rather than in your phone that you may not always have with you, those two options are pretty much comparable. And also, hopefully everyone's aware of this, but we have a brand new program, the K-12 Rides Free program, which we started last summer, and it runs through this whole school year until next summer, which allows any K-12 student in the metro area to ride free on any of our services. So we're really excited about that pilot program. It was in partnership with a very generous funder here locally. So hopefully many of you know people who have been impacted by that. We also want to talk about transfers and how that impacts riders as they're navigating our system. And any other ideas or suggestions regarding fare payment. So I'll pause for a second and see if there's any questions that anyone wants to discuss, or if they want to talk about any of their experiences paying on our bus system.
Has anyone tried UMO yet? Okay, got a quiet group. I think I would just, while people were thinking of maybe kind of comments or things they'd like to share, you feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand or pop it in the chat, whatever works for you. But we want to make sure with this process, as Evan said, that we're really thinking about ways that we can streamline fare payments, make sure that we're developing past programs that make sense. I think the K-12 pilot program is something that's really exciting for us. Wanting to think about how transfers work in there. So the idea overall is really to think about, okay, not just right now, but what else would we like to see moving forward? But it seems like fares aren't a very exciting topic for this group, unless there's anyone else who wants to send a message. But otherwise, let's keep on going.
Sure. Yeah, so the next big component of MetroNEXT is this Transit Suitability Index, which we developed in partnership with MAPA earlier this year. And it really breaks down about a dozen different metrics that we know influence how likely people are in a neighborhood to ride transit. So that's not just the number of people that live in an area, but who they are. So the characteristics of their household, whether they own a vehicle, low income or minority status, any of those things that may cause them to ride more than the average person. We also looked at sidewalk accessibility, the number of destinations such as essential services and jobs. And so all of those things compile together into a ranking of low, medium, or high across the region. And so as you look at this map, the kind of central, downtown, and north areas of our city have pretty strong markets for transit. And so that orange color kind of extends out beyond that across a lot of our metro, but not as solid of a mass. And those areas have pretty moderate levels of transit suitability. And you can see these gray lines indicate where our routes go. And for the most part, we're seeing good overlap of those areas. The gold color are areas across our region that have some level of transit need, but maybe not enough to sustain a fixed route service. And so many of those are in areas that we don't currently serve. And so we want to think creatively about how do we address those problems as well as any other opportunities for transit across the region. So kind of as we plan out our system, there's two ends of the spectrum that we could approach the challenge from. A coverage approach would be to provide basic levels of service everywhere. So again, going back to this map here, we would want every one of these little grids to have some type of service. Even if it only runs a couple times a week or every few hours, at least we could say everyone has something. And that would be one way to approach things. On the other end of the spectrum is more of a frequency-based approach, where we really focus our resources where ridership potential is highest. And so, under that model, we may only serve the red areas, but the transit service that we provide is show up every 10 minutes. You basically can go anytime and not have to wonder whether service is running or not. Those are kind of the two extremes, and we probably wouldn't land on either one of those, but probably the right fit is going to be somewhere in the middle. And so I'd say we currently operate more of a coverage model than a frequency model, but we do have service standards in place that as we evaluate opportunities and make changes incrementally, we're slowly moving down the dial towards more of a frequency-based system. So again, just kind of want to check in with people and see if that's the right approach or any reactions to that. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about tonight is potential new service options. And so we've got two types of service here that we don't currently operate in Omaha, but other transit agencies across the country have done. So these are things we're considering with our planning effort. And the first one we'll talk about is called MicroTransit. And so this photo here is an example from Sacramento. It's a shared ride service. So operates a lot like Uber or Lyft, where you can book a trip on your phone and you're going to share that ride with other passengers. So it would also be available for call-in scheduling. So it's not only available by a phone app. And so that type of a system may set up a zone where you can schedule trips from A to B, and the bus may not always follow that same path. It would deviate and be flexible based on who's riding and who needs the service at that time of day. So it's a pretty nimble service type that we're looking at. And like I said, a lot of other transit agencies across the country are doing this. So there's a lot of models out there, and each one may be a little bit different in terms of how it's operated and how it functions, but definitely something we want to consider. Van pooling is another service type that we're looking at through MetroNEXT. And it's just like a carpool, except typically the transit agency provides the vehicle. So this may be a group of folks that all work in the same place and they live in the same general area. And so using this vehicle that the transit agency provides, they amongst themselves share the responsibility of driving and the costs, and then there's some reimbursement in some cases, so that we're able to offer a transit solution in an area where a bus route doesn't exist. So yeah, again, something that we're considering, and it would probably make the most sense for some of those areas shown in gold on the map we looked at earlier. Another thing.
I would just say, Evan, we had a comment in the chat about liking these ideas and really appreciate that feedback. I will say, just so everybody knows, if you don't already, that NDOT already has some van pooling options. So there are some solutions there. This would be an idea about maybe expanding that or adding to that. And then I think the MicroTransit really makes sense in kind of some of those low density areas. It's a relatively expensive option, but I think it really helps solve that challenge of how do we provide quality service in some of those areas that aren't as high on that transit suitability index. So love to hear that feedback, and would love to, we'll talk in a little bit too, but think about where maybe even some of those areas or zones might make sense for later parts of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we a few weeks ago had some meetings on the topic of our rapid transit corridors. And just to kind of summarize that information for anyone who may have missed it, throughout this year, we've been hearing a lot of feedback, and even prior to this year, people like the orbit line on Dodge Street, but almost everybody says that one line isn't a perfect solution. We need to be expanding and creating a network of frequent lines, and we totally agreed. So there were about 15 corridors that the public suggested earlier, I think it was around March. And so our staff kind of compared those corridors to each other and had a couple rise to the top. So you'll see on this map, we've got First Ave and Council Bluffs, the North Belt line, which goes from the North Omaha Transit Center down to UNMC's campus, and then 72nd Street from Emmanuel to the Ralston Arena. Those are all corridors that we thought made a lot of sense. We don't at this time have any timeline for enhancing them. The one that we have identified as our top priority is 24th Street. So you may have seen headlines in the news that we pursued some federal funds to study that corridor, and we're able to receive those. We got notice of that a few weeks ago. So that study will go into a little bit more depth. And just to explain, the study area is from Q Street on the south to Ames Avenue on the north, primarily on 24th Street, but we are evaluating an option that would run service on 30th Street from Dodge up to the MCC Ford campus. So our study process will basically compare two potential solutions for that corridor. One of them being Orbit, which everyone is probably familiar with, which is substantial capital and operational investment. It has these raised platforms and full-size large stations. It does require space in the right-of-way for bus lanes and stations. And if we went with that option, it would be probably a 6 to 10 year timeline to go through all the design process and get it built. There is another option that we'll be looking at, which is called enhanced bus service. And Kansas City, I've got a picture here of their MAX line, which is a good example of what that looks like. And it's a lot of the same elements as Orbit, but a more moderate level of capital and operational investment. So the stations are a little bit smaller. In many cases, they're just a standard bus shelter. The design is more adaptable, so it can fit the context of the corridor. And that can be deployed much more quickly, usually because it's not as extensive of construction and engineering. So if 24th Street, if we study the corridor and identify this as our best solution, we're hoping to be able to achieve that within probably the 3 to 8 year range. So cutting down a couple years in that review process. And so our study will kick off next summer, and we're planning for about 18 to 24 months to complete that process. And that will include feasibility assessment and reviewing some of these alternatives in terms of what type of service we propose, as well as what corridors and what alignment is the best option. And then there will be some environmental review before we select the preferred alternative. And then we can do some initial engineering and complete the study at what the industry calls 30% design. And so that basically gets us every step checked off the list so that we would be in the pipeline to apply for federal construction funds and final design. So we're hoping to have that all completed by the end of 2023. And there will be more information to share once that process kicks off.
So Evan, let's pause there and ask for some comments. We did get a comment in the chat about with Orbit or enhanced bus lanes or enhanced bus, whether these would be bus only lanes, and then whether or not there'd be other enhancements to prioritize speeds. So I'd encourage anyone else who have any thoughts, comments, raise your hand. We want to hear your ideas, but maybe you can take that question, Evan.
Yeah, so with both of these types of service, we would be looking for any opportunities to increase travel speeds for our transit riders. So in the case of Orbit, our kind of service standard that we've outlined is we want at least 10% of the corridor to have bus lanes. And we would like to pursue much higher than that, but 10% is kind of the minimum. And if we're not able to achieve 10% of the corridor, then it's really beginning to fall into more of the category of enhanced bus, where there isn't that significant increase in travel speed. But there's still, with enhanced bus, you can have signal priority or other infrastructure amenities that help speed up the process, it just wouldn't be as substantial as what you would see on an orbit line. So hopefully that clarifies things. Feel free, Lauren, to chime in if there's more we want to say about that.
Yeah, so I think that's, that's part of the trade-offs that we'll be talking about in this 24th Street corridor study is, there is a lot more capital and investment in an orbit, but also we have to really make sure we're right sizing it to the solution. So part of what means whether or not there be an orbit or enhanced bus is looking at how much right of way there is. Is there room to make part of the corridor at least bus only lanes? Is there enough room for these stations? And then the other piece of it is the spacing between stations. Part of what makes orbit bus rapid transit and not regular bus service is that the stations are a lot further spaced apart, that they're not so close together. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But enhanced bus has some more flexibility. So we really need to look at how much space is available, what the community needs are, and then also how people travel within the corridor. And you've got some more questions coming in the chat here too.
Yeah, I see that. So there's this question here from Sarah about enhanced bus, whether there would be kind of a local route that makes all stops compared to a faster route that has select stops. And that is something that other cities have done. It's something we considered for Orbit on Dodge. But when we really dove into the travel patterns that we were seeing already, 9 out of 10 riders on Dodge Street were already pretty close to where our Orbit stations were. And so it was determined through that process that the best way to upgrade the travel experience for everyone was to just have one line that ran as frequently as possible. One of the challenges with a route that makes local stops and a route that makes express stops is then you've got kind of leapfrogging where one bus is trying to pass another. So we felt that the dance between those two services would cause more delays than we wanted to see on either service type. So that's part of the equation. And I would guess probably with 24th Street, it wouldn't make sense for the local and express to overlap each other for the same reason. 24th especially is in some segments only one lane. So we wouldn't want our local service holding up our rapid line. But it's always a process of evaluating travel patterns to determine what the needs are and what the best solution is. So we wouldn't say right out of the gate that that's off the table, but it's a lower likelihood that we would go forward with that.
Yeah, we'll study that as a part of each future corridor. There are some reasons that you want that overlay local service that stops more frequently. And there's other reasons why sometimes you really want to focus on making the one route come very, very often, because if you have the same number of buses available, you really want to think about that interaction. And so each case is a little bit different, and we'll be really studying that a lot further on 24th Street and then all those other corridors.
Yep. So just to make sure that we click through all these questions here, differences in stop spacing between these two. On orbit service, we would probably look in the range of stops every probably 4 to 12 blocks, and probably more towards a half mile being the ideal spacing, which is in Omaha is 6 blocks. Enhanced bus would be a little bit closer together. So that would be more like 3 to maybe 8 blocks apart. But the average stop spacing would be about every 4 to 5. So that's an oversimplification. Again, we would start by looking at where the ridership patterns are today and where if it naturally groups itself into certain locations, then we would lean towards that rather than just assigning a half mile across the board, if that makes sense. And then the question here about whether there's certain employers or locations that are good candidates for van pool. I think that is a service option that is pretty adaptable. I mean, obviously, cases where several people work together at the same organization naturally lends itself to all of them talking and organizing amongst themselves. I know there's some successful cases where we've got a group of employees that kind of lives in the Omaha region and works in Fremont or somewhere else that's pretty far out of town. And so a lot of people don't want to make that drive every day by themselves if they can help it. So that's another case where van pooling makes a lot of sense. But really, it just kind of depends on the part of town and the traffic conditions and the parking situation. And especially if there's a workforce that not everybody drives, but someone may live in their neighborhood who's willing to drive, that's a perfect solution to help those people get connected to employment without actually having to go out and buy their own car or come up with other arrangements. So not sure if that fully answers your question, but thanks for the comment.
I guess, and unless, Jim, did you have any suggestions of locations? And just as a reminder, guys, please feel free to unmute yourself too and chat. We're a small group, but I think we can certainly, if you have questions, you chat is fine, but you're also welcome to unmute yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, I've spoken with Evan. So I'm Jim Bourne. I'm a transportation planner from MAPA. So I guess it was kind of a loaded question, but in a recent public input period, there was kind of that commentary, and then the example that was given was Offutt Air Force Base, but I think just kind of that Bellevue area, so Offutt and Bellevue University, where I think, as you showed, it's not necessarily in that transit shed naturally, but it does offer a good number of people that may be on a more routine schedule than other riders.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Cool. So this part we already talked about. I guess the next big thing that we want to get into is we've got a draft version of a future network, and we'll share a link to that so that you can review things here in a minute. But at this point, we're just kind of looking for what needs kind of rise to the top for our community. So that's areas that we serve today, but maybe they warrant more service than we currently offer. It may be locations outside of our service area where people are constantly running into a barrier of, I have to get to this location and transit doesn't work for me. Those are the types of things we want to hear about. And especially as you think of these different service types like van pooling, enhanced bus, microtransit, some of these new ideas. If you have specific locations where you think, hey, that would be a perfect fit, we want to hear that. And if you have other ideas as well, please share those. So before we dive in, and I think Annie will be sharing the link in the chat here in a moment, just want to explain the map that you'll see. So this map is not optimized for mobile, so it'll work best from a desktop. But we have outlined here several different types of service and other opportunities that we're considering as part of the plan. So just to explain a little bit, a dotted line represents service that we don't currently operate that we're considering. And solid lines are service that's already in existence, but would likely be enhanced through our study process. And then these kind of shaded boxes are evaluation areas that we've identified. So for example, we've got this one in Millard from about 84th Street out to 132nd. And that goes from Harrison to just south of Center. And so that area of Millard, we have Route 55 that serves part of that area, but we know of several destinations or major employers that would like to have additional service. And they don't all lend themselves naturally into a line for a new bus route, but we want to continue to evaluate what those top needs are in the area. And maybe it's a case where van pooling or microtransit can come in as a good solution. But again, we're at this time just trying to check with folks to find out if we've accurately heard what the top needs are. So we've got a zone like that for La Vista, and the ones shaded in green just show that they're in Sarpy County, which is outside of our jurisdiction. We do want to represent that need still exists, even though there are some bureaucratic barriers to us directly serving those right away. That doesn't mean it can't be overcome over the next 5 to 10 years, but we do want to highlight those differences. So we've got a zone designated in Bellevue as well. South Omaha, East Omaha, kind of near the airport and some of the rising industrial areas that are being developed there. A zone up in Florence and McKinley Street, and then the area kind of west of Westroads Transit Center in that central part of Omaha. Those are locations that we've heard about quite a bit as needing additional service that we don't currently offer. But with that, I'm going to pull up the map here and just kind of explain a few things that you'll see once you log in. So you'll see a lot of these little chat icons are people that have commented on the map. And so if you would like to add your own comments, just go to the top right corner where it says post comment, and it'll give you a little indicator so that you can drop a comment on the map wherever you'd like. So if there's a specific location that you want to say something about, you can enter that, post a message. Your name and email are optional, but if you choose to put those in, it will become visible to everyone. So just a heads up, and I'm going to cancel out of that for now. The other option you have is if you want to comment specifically on a line, you can, oh, it's not working for me at the moment, so that makes this kind of funny. But you can click on a route first and then click the post comment, and it'll actually change your icon to a color to correspond with that route. So here's one of somebody that commented on our proposed Fort Street Express, and they were interested in that route. So that's another way to provide comments. So I'll take a minute here and see if anyone wants to either, if this is a hassle, you're welcome to just say in the chat what you want to post. Or if you would like to get your comments recorded that way, it's the same process, and all of this kind of helps contribute to our planning effort. So yeah, at this point, we just want to have a conversation about what the greatest needs are in our area and what people see as opportunities that we should consider going forward.
So I have a, sorry I missed a little bit of the early part of the conversation. I have a little quick question, just looking at the map and trying to understand the transit suitability. Over on the western portion, near the section that says Chalco, like, are you guys seeing, or is there a demand to go on the southern portion between Sarpy and Douglas County, so connecting Bellevue to the western portion of Douglas County and kind of north west portion of Sarpy County? Like, is there a demand on that way? Because everything seems to be gearing towards downtown. So in order to get to Bellevue, if you're near that kind of area west of the Pilling, looks like you have to go all the way to downtown Omaha to get down to Bellevue and or off it. And so considering Offutt being one of these kind of major employers in the area, just wondering if you have information or background on how much that movement tends to happen, and if that would warrant additional study or information for it.
Sure. Yeah. Just to explain the suitability index. So that exercise is not necessarily a way to identify travel patterns. It's just potential markets. So the reason that this gray area shows up so dark is because of the number of residents, the number of jobs, and all of that kind of stuff. So totally agree with you that there's a separate effort that needs to be done to kind of identify, okay, we know there's a large number of people here, large number of jobs there. How many people are traveling between the two? And what method are they using to get there? That's an exercise or kind of a step in the process that is not a direct part of the suitability index. So that work would need to come later.
Follow up on your high concentration areas. They're kind of pronounced, right? Little areas. I guess this kind of feeds off the original comment there, but do you see needs, or do you know if there are needs actually within those kind of dark spot areas for localized kind of circulator travel, or is that more of like traveling from that kind of central focus area down to downtown? Again, feeding off the last question, I understand additional research, but do you think those kinds of things would make sense in terms of creating circulators in and around other density centers to feed into main trunk lines?
Yeah, I think it's both and. You know, when you have a large cluster area of activity, we know there's going to be a larger amount of trips occurring within that zone as people go to the various destinations. But there's also going to be a larger generation of trips from there to other places. So overall, I'd say downtown is our, probably not our #1 trip generator, but it's still a major trip generator compared to other places within the region. But as we see our economy in our region move more from a downtown centric travel model to an everywhere to everywhere model, transit gets much more challenging to serve because like you said, we're trying to provide as direct a connection as possible from where you are to any other place that you might possibly go. And we really can't do all of that well unless we're able to identify those areas where we're seeing a strong amount of movement between folks, or like the areas where lots more people are going consistently, if that makes sense. So once we kind of identify those larger bands of travel, that's where we can step in and have a good transit solution for it. But as an interim step, a lot of these, the microtransit and van pooling services are a good way to kind of pilot out these new areas and find out where are people traveling and is there a cluster of them that seems to lend themselves towards a fixed route service. So I don't know if that's making sense, but at least that's in my mind how we would need to approach those areas.
Great. We have a comment in the chat from Candace as well, asking about anything specifically being planned for the Route 16, that it looks like the route is being set up for some future changes.
Yeah, so that area has been identified. We've heard lots of people talk about wanting additional service to the airport. And we've had some early conversations with the airport authority. And one of the challenges that we're seeing at this point is trying to accommodate when throughout the week the airport is busiest. And what we found is a lot of the departures and arrivals happen typically late night or early morning, and a lot more on weekends. And anyone familiar with our routes knows that that's kind of the times of the week when our service is running its least. So if we wanted to serve the airport well, we would probably need to have service that runs every 15 to 30 minutes, even on the weekends up until, you know, midnight or later. And we know that most riders won't just need to go back to downtown from the airport. They'll need to go from downtown to wherever they live. And so then you're talking about having all other routes in the system operating at a higher level at those times of the week as well. So it's not as simple of a solution as we'd like, but that doesn't mean we can't try incremental improvements. And so I think at this time, what we're looking at is coming up with ways to upgrade service on Route 16 or identifying some other potential service that could help address the needs in this area and kind of build up and test the case for more service to the airport. But I'll say that with the caveat that we still have to kind of see where everything falls with the budget. We have to see what partnership opportunities there are to increase funding for new service. And we have to really understand what those additional needs and times are going to be.
I guess I'd pose the question back to the group if there's specific suggestions around service to the airport and that Route 16 in general. Anybody ride it or have any reactions to it? Okay, not a problem. I'll turn it back over to you then, Evan. Thanks.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, in some cases like that, even if you have an interest in taking a route to the airport, because it may not operate the day of the week that you need or the time of day, there may be a demand for service, even if people on this call haven't written it. So I just wanted to voice that you may have every intention of using a bus route to the airport, but then when you go to look at the schedule, you're like, oh, yeah, that actually doesn't work for me this time. All that to say, we can advocate for it to be better, even if we haven't personally been on it. With that, any other questions or comments? Hopefully people are having success with navigating the platform to go in and place your own comments. I haven't seen, I guess I haven't been looking too closely at the newest things to come in. But yeah, happy to address any questions. We may wrap up early otherwise, because this is pretty much what we had in mind for tonight. So I'm going to refresh this and see if anything new comes through. And this may be a little bit delayed, but it's saying no new comments today yet. So.
Quick question. Within the comments on the transit lines themselves, could we make comments about like flex routing or thinking about flex route systems potentially, like at the edge of something? Okay, just checking.
Yeah, so if you are interested in maybe this Gretna Express, we heard from folks that said, you know, this is a nice idea, but it doesn't actually serve Gretna. So you could select this route and post something out in Gretna and still have it be associated with that route. Or if you wanted to say, this is nice, but we should have a deviation in this area. Yeah, we certainly can consider those. And every time I do this, I click the wrong place, it seems. So now we've got, there we go. Had to cancel out. I'm all over the place, guys.
And I would just say you can certainly post a comment anywhere on the map. You can link it to a proposed route. You can put a comment out in way outside of the area if you have a suggestion of a place that we're not serving, or hey, a line should go here. MicroTransit, this is really just a place for everyone to share all of their thoughts and ideas of either potential destinations, routes that maybe need more frequency, a new place to put a route. It's a little bit of a free-for-all, but just wanting to hear everyone's thoughts. All right. Well, I think we'll give everybody some time to play with that a little bit. If Evan, maybe you want to share how long that's going to be up for, because it'll be available for a while for people to keep posting in too.
Yeah, we haven't really set an end date. So we can for sure keep it up through the rest of this week, and probably honestly up through Christmas, if people want to keep commenting on it. And then we'll, after that, kind of switch gears towards processing and reviewing all that feedback and helping shape that into new route proposals. So yeah, we'll say through end of next week. it'll be up and available. But with that, that kind of wraps up all the information that we had planned for tonight. But be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. You can also find all previous meeting recordings at ometro.com/MetroNEXT, as well as lots of other helpful information about where we've been, what we've looked at, and what's to be expected as we move forward. So that's a great place to read more and get updates as we go through this process.